Okay, how do you actually stop war? I don't mean just pause it, I mean end it. Forever. Well, back in 1795, while Europe was being torn apart by conflict, the philosopher Immanuel Kant decided to tackle that exact question. And he didn't just offer up some vague hopes or prayers. No, he drafted a technical, legal blueprint for what he called perpetual peace. So let's dive into this surprisingly modern and pretty radical plan.
Everything we're going to cover here comes directly from this one short but incredibly powerful essay. Kant himself called it a philosophical sketch, almost like a design document for peace. And today, we're going to unpack its core ideas together.
So Kant kicks off this whole essay with a bit of dark humor, which you might not expect. He tells this story about a Dutch innkeeper who had this exact phrase, "to perpetual peace," painted on his inn sign. The catch? The illustration on the sign was a graveyard. That cynical opening really sets up the central question, doesn't it? Is this whole idea of lasting peace just some fantasy? A grim punchline that's only possible when we're all in the grave? For Kant, the answer was a hard no. He was absolutely determined to prove that this was a serious and, more importantly, an achievable political goal. You see, Kant is no starry-eyed idealist. He starts from a place that's actually starkly realistic. He argues that the default setting for humanity isn't peace, it's a state of war. Now, that doesn't always mean non-stop fighting, but the constant threat of it. So for him, peace isn't something that just happens. It has to be deliberately, formally, and legally built. And here, Kant makes a really crucial distinction. He wasn't interested in what he'd call negative peace, what we might just call a ceasefire or a temporary truce. That's just a pause button. He was aiming for positive peace, a robust system that gets rid of the very conditions that lead to war in the first place, and then locks that in with a legal framework. To really get how revolutionary this was for its time, we have to look at how people thought about peace before him. Kant's whole approach was a massive, massive break from the past. So for a long time, peace was seen as something handed down from on high. For thinkers like Augustine in the Middle Ages, it was all about obeying God's law. Later, for someone like Hobbes, it was about having a super powerful king impose it by force. But Kant, he completely changes the game. He argues that peace has to be built from the ground up, using a tool that every single human has, reason. And that is what made his idea so radical. His blueprint wasn't just for Christians, or for Germans, or for Europeans. It was a secular, universal framework based on legal principles. In theory, any rational society on Earth could understand it and adopt it. For 1795, that was a mind-blowing concept.
So what does this blueprint actually look like? Well, Kant broke it down into two really clear parts. First up, what he called the preliminary articles. These are the essential ground rules to stop the immediate cycle of war.
Right. Think of it like a two-step process. First, you have to stop making the problem worse. Those are the don'ts. Then, once you've done that, you can start actively building the structures for a real, lasting peace. And those are the do's. Okay, so here are his 6 big don'ts. They're all designed to do one thing: break the cycle of mistrust that keeps planting the seeds for the next war. He's talking about no more secret treaties, getting rid of huge standing armies, and not meddling in other countries' business. The core idea here is that nations have to start acting honorably, even toward their enemies, if you ever want to make a genuine, lasting peace possible. So those rules are kind of like first aid. They're meant to stop the bleeding. But for Kant, the real cure, the absolute bedrock of his entire plan for perpetual peace, was something way more fundamental. He argued that every single state must have what he called a Republican constitution. Now, let's be super clear, this has nothing to do with the Republican Party. For Kant, Republican just meant a state built on 3 big ideas: freedom, equality, and the rule of law for every citizen. And, crucially, it requires a separation of powers, meaning the people who make the laws aren't the same people who carry them out. So why was this one idea so important? Why did he believe that this specific type of government was the magic ingredient for ending war for good? Well, the logic is just brilliantly simple. In a republic, the decision to go to war has to have the consent of the citizens. And who pays the price for war? The citizens. They're the ones who have to fight. They're the ones who have to pay the taxes. They're the ones who have to rebuild from the destruction and carry the debt. But in a despotism, a single ruler can just declare war for some trivial reason. Kant actually says they treat it like a kind of pleasure party because they risk absolutely nothing of their own. They don't fight, they don't pay, they just order it from their palace. So it all boils down to this. Kant's system creates this incredibly powerful incentive for peace. It lines up the power to declare war with the responsibility for its horrifying consequences. He was convinced that when the citizens themselves are forced to really consider the unbelievable cost, they will very, very rarely choose to start such a terrible game. Suddenly, peace becomes the most logical, rational choice you can make. And this brings us right back to where we started, with that cynical innkeeper and his sign of a graveyard. Was Kant's incredibly detailed blueprint just a beautiful utopian dream after all? Well, this is a debate that has raged for over 200 years. Lots of critics have just dismissed the whole thing as naive, impossible, a fantasy cooked up by a philosopher in his study. But supporters, even back in his own time, argued that no, this isn't a dream. It is, as they put it, a juridical demand of human reason. Basically, something that logic and law themselves require us to strive for. And really, Kant himself frames it that way. Remember, the title he gave it was a philosophical sketch, a draft, a design. He saw himself as an architect of peace, drawing up a rational blueprint for a structure that he genuinely believed humanity could and absolutely should build. So that leaves us with one last question to think about. When you look at our world today, full of conflict and incredibly complex alliances, is this 200-year-old blueprint just a relic, a beautiful but naive dream from a different time? Or is it a profound duty that we just haven't found the courage to fulfill yet?